Hey everybody, and welcome to this video. This is going to be a video on the brand new, I believe it's brand new. I'm not completely sure, but at least like it's brand new to me. This is the Wet n Wild 40 pan palette. This I saw when I went on to wetnwild.com. They were having a sale. I think there was like a couple of things, like specific things on their website that was 50% off, and this was one of them. And I saw it and I was like, oh, I've never had like a huge palette from Wet n Wild, so I was really interested. So I went. This was only $9.99 when it was on sale, so I believe it's $20, you know, regularly, but I did get it for $10. And so when it came in, I opened it and I looked at it and I was like, this is a James palette. James palette. Why do I keep saying James palette? This is a James Charles Morphe palette dupe for sure. I saw it and that's the first thing that I thought. So I went and I got my James Charles palette and I looked at it and I was like, this is definitely a dupe. Like there are a couple of differences with like some of the shades, but overall like you can definitely see where the inspiration came from. So I haven't tried this palette out or anything. I want to do a side-by-side comparison between this Wet n Wild 40 pan palette and this James Charles palette. Even like the size of the palettes, they're the same size, y'all. Like, yeah, I mean the Wet n Wild one is a little bit shorter just because those middle shades from the James Charles that have like the bigger pans, this doesn't have it. All the Wet n Wild shadows are the same exact pan size, so that is one difference. So let's go ahead and get into the video to see these swatches and see them side by side, how they perform, and if this is a $10/$20 dupe for the James Charles Morphe palette. If you're interested, then just go ahead and keep on watching. So first and foremost, I will show you, this is the Wet n Wild 40 pan palette, and when you open it up, these are the shades. And literally when I saw it, I was like, this is James Charles palette. Like this is the Morphe palette. So that's what that looks like. Now I'll show you what the James Charles palette looks like, and we can compare. Again, there are a few shade differences, but that overall, like the palettes are basically the same thing. So this is the James Charles one. So just off the bat, you can kind of see like this bright green wasn't in the other shadow palette. I think a couple of the purples were different, but overall like the vibe of both the palettes is very similar. Alright, so on your right is the Wet n Wild one, and on the left is the James Charles one. So you can see there are some like key differences, like a couple of differences, but the overall vibe is basically the same. Like, come on now, look at that. Now I'll go ahead and go into the swatches of the looks, and you can see them side by side. I'll show you the James Charles next to the Wet n Wild, and we'll see if these colors are dupes or anything like that. But I'm also just going to do an eye look, one eye one and one eye the other, and see if we can see the difference. So I'm really excited. Alright, so let's go ahead and get into the actual trying out the shadows portion of this video and see what they look like on the eye side by side, and if we can get the same look from both palettes. Alright, so first and foremost, I'm just going to start off by priming my eyes on both sides with the NYX HD Studio Primer. Alright, so I think the look that I want to go for is like a yellow smoky eye. So we're going to really test out those yellows in both the palettes. I mean, just looking at it from straight on, you can definitely see the pigmentation in the yellow, and the Morphe James Charles palette is a lot brighter and just more there than the Wet n Wild one. Like you can just kind of, just by looking at it, you can tell the quality difference of the shadows for sure. But I just want to see if this is just like a cheaper alternative for those of you that don't want to spend the, I don't know how much is the James Charles palette, like 40 or something like that. How much is it? Let's see. Yeah, the full palette is $39. So yeah, so $40 versus $20. It's about half the price. So if you want to like just kind of see if this is a cheaper alternative, basically. So first and foremost, I'm just gonna go off what? I'm gonna go off it. First things first is I'm just going to start with the base shadow. So I'm gonna take Punch Me from the James Charles palette, tap it off, and I'm gonna use this eye as the James Charles one, so my right eye, but it's left on your screen, and just lay this down as a base in the crease. And this is very similar to my skin tone, so it's just gonna help kind of later on with the blending. Like you can see it a little bit, but it's not like gonna give you like amazing vibes. Boom, there we go. Now the Wet n Wild palette does not have any names or anything on it, so it's just the first shade in the second row. And yeah, that color difference is very obvious. This looks like super like pale, like almost white. Yikes, what is this? It's literally like making my eye look dry. Yeah, so first and foremost, the Morphe one definitely won that round for sure, but we're not finished yet, y'all. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the shade Code James in the Morphe palette and work that into the crease. So I'm going to go into the 5th shade in the 3rd row on the Wet n Wild palette and apply that on this side. So once you start building, the color definitely comes through. This shade is a little bit more orangey than this one. This is more of like an orange brown, where this one is more of like a straight up orange. So the colors aren't exactly the same. And as you can see, like when I'm putting them on, like the pigmentation and blendability are definitely different, where you feel like you just have to work a little bit harder with the Wet n Wild, but you do, you know, eventually get that color payoff. It's just a little bit more quick and easy with the Morphe side. Now I'm going to go into the shade 10% Off from the Morphe palette and place that into the crease and outer corner. Ooh, that is definitely not the same shade. Oh Lord, this one is a lot lighter than that Morphe one, but I'm just gonna take the 6th shade on the 3rd row from the Wet n Wild and do the same thing. I feel like on this eye, all the colors are kind of like just blending together, and I don't have as much like depth as I do on the Morphe side. It's just kind of there, like, you know what I mean? I'm gonna go in with the shade Spooky from the James Charles palette, which is just that matte black, and just a little bit, take a little bit right here in this outer corner. And I'm just gonna start smoking that outer corner. Okay, but mostly right here in that outer V, and then slowly just blend it outwards. Alright, take the 8th shade on the 3rd row, which is that matte black, and do the same exact thing. You can see the black just right off the bat isn't as pigmented, so you're really gonna have to like build it up. Okay. Now I'm just going to take this P.Louise eyeshadow base and kind of just carve out the lid on both sides. So, you know, we have the same base on both. And this one is the eyeshadow base in Rumour 05. So it's more of like a skin tone shade for me. And I feel like it might also be very important for me to tell you, like, my eyes are not the same shape. So one is definitely, this one is more hooded than this one. So just so you know. Alright. So now I'm going to go in with the shade B from James Charles, which is that really bright yellow. Ooh, fallout for sure. Let me put a little bit of powder down. Alright, so I'm just going to put powder down just to ensure that the fallout doesn't mess up my under eyes. So back to what we were doing is placing the B shade. So this shade is a little bit tricky. You definitely do have to build it up. I think maybe if we would have used a white base, it might have made it a little bit easier, just because I feel like that neutral color kind of mixed in with that first layer of yellow and changed the shade a little bit. And so now, like, it's a little bit patchy where, like, some areas have, like, different shades of yellow. But, I mean, it's still a pretty color overall. It's just, you know, definitely do have to work with this shade a little bit more from that palette. I'm also going to go back into the brush that we used with those like browns, like with the, I think this was the one I used with the show with the code 10% off, and go in with that right at the edge between the yellow and the black. Just take a little bit of 10% off. Kind of blend those two together, so it doesn't go from like yellow to black. It kind of just blends a little bit better. Also just take some right at the edge of that yellow. Where is that brush? I have like a million of these. Like, these are like little dollar brushes that I got off of AliExpress. They're supposed to be like the MAC 232, and I just got like a bunch of these. So yeah, I'll try to leave a link below if y'all are interested. I think I found it like on Twitter, and I was like, I'm definitely getting like a ton. So now I'm taking the first shade in the 4th row from the Wet n Wild side and placing that down. So the yellow in this Wet n Wild palette is definitely like a lot more vibrant and like a brighter yellow, where the one on the James Charles is more of like a little bit more of like a neutral yellow, like almost like a brownishy kind of yellow. I feel like it is a little bit easier on the Wet n Wild side, not gonna lie. With this shade, it's not giving me as much issues and like patchiness from the base that the other side gave me. But I definitely do like the tone of the Morphe yellow more than this one. This one's like just very, very bright, where this one looks a little bit more neutrally. So there's that. Now I'm gonna go in with that 6th shade in the 3rd row and do the same thing on the other side, where we're kind of trying to blend it into the black, using that brown shade to kind of blend into the black. All right, now going back in to that black shade, just getting a little bit, and I'm gonna start with this eye over here, build it back up a little bit, and do the same on the other eye with the shade Spooky. Keep helping to blend out that black, make it all kind of melt together. Go back over here and do the same. Alright, so what I'm going to do is really just smoke out that lower lash line on both eyes. I'm just using my e.l.f. waterproof gel liner in black, I believe. And it's just a black one. I don't know if that's the shade name, but it's black. And I'm using this on both eyes. She black, girl. She is black. And then I'm just going to take that, again, Spooky shade from the Morphe palette, and go right and smoke out that liner on the lower lash line. When I have it laid, then I'm just going to take a clean, like, little tiny blending brush and just blend out the black. And then I'm going to do the same thing with that black shade from the Wet n Wild palette. And then take a clean bullet brush and blend it out. I definitely think it packed on very, very nicely. So if you like pack it on, maybe I should have tried that on the top. Let me try and just pack that shade like really like right here. Right in the outer corner. And then blend it. There we go. And that's just, you know, very dark under there for me. Like I kind of like a little bit more of like an ombre. So I'm going to take the shade, it's the 5th shade, that we used on the 3rd row in the Wet n Wild palette, and use that to kind of blend out the very edge of the black. Right, and then I'm going to take that shade and do the same thing with Code James. Alright, what I'm going to do is just take a little pencil brush and pack that yellow into that inner corner also. And do the same thing with the yellow from the James palette. These are the eyes, so I'm just going to go ahead and put on some lashes really quickly, finish off my lips and my face, and then come back and we will have a chat about these palettes. Alright, so this is what the makeup looks like with everything on. I will leave down below a list of all the products that I use if you guys are interested. I am filming a first impression on this foundation right now, so that will be the next video that I post. If you're interested, then stay tuned to see what my thoughts are on the foundation. But as far as this palette, now that everything has kind of like settled in and all that, I think that the eyes look very similar from far away. I mean, up close when you really get into the eyes, you can kind of tell the difference. I feel like the Wet n Wild side doesn't look as kind of smoothed. The yellow does look a lot better on the Wet n Wild side than it does on the Morphe side. The Morphe yellow is just a little bit more patchy, and I feel like it kind of fades a little bit quicker than the Wet n Wild. So that does have the Wet n What am I saying? So that is an upside of the Wet n Wild one, is that the yellow is fire. These shades are not identical, so there is a kind of difference in shade, but overall the tones and stuff, like you can kind of still get the same vibe, as you can see on both my eyes. Like even though the shades aren't exactly perfect, it still has the same vibe, you know what I mean? So overall I think that this is a good product if you're willing to put in the extra work and the extra effort. You do have to build up the eyeshadows a little bit more. You do have to spend a little bit more time blending and really getting that seamless kind of blend with these shadows, whereas it's a little bit easier with the Morphe ones. They're a little bit more pigmented and a little bit kind of smoother and more easy to blend. However, if you do want to save that extra $20 and go with the Wet n Wild, I don't think you'll be disappointed. So you do get an extra shade in the Wet n Wild palette that you don't have in the James Charles one, which is that like sparkly gold color, since the middle pans are not bigger like they are in the Morphe palette. You also don't have exact shades that you do in the Morphe one. Like you don't have that bright matte orange shade, you don't have that like bright lime green shade, you don't have a matte green shade. It's more of a shimmer in the Wet n Wild one. You don't have that matte purple shade. So there are a couple of mattes missing where Wet n Wild just went in with shimmers instead of mattes. So you aren't getting the exact same palette, obviously. But I think they're definitely comparable. It's just whether you want to take that extra time and spend the time packing on the shadows and blending it out to get a really good eye, but you can get a good eye out of it. So those are my thoughts on this palette. Overall, I think, like I said, they're both great palettes. There is a miniature version of the James Charles palette. I think that's only $26, so that could also be another alternative. If you don't want to spend the $40 on the James Charles palette, you could just get that mini one, which has all the exact same shades of the James Charles palette. It's just a miniature version, but again, that is another $6 more than this Wet n Wild. So overall, you know, the purchasing power is in you and your wallet. What you want to do, how you want to spend your money is up to you. I'm just giving you my thoughts and ideas on the two palettes next to each other. So yeah, let me know down below if you guys have used this palette, what your thoughts are on it, and did you even like realize that it was a James Charles dupe? Because as soon as I saw it, I was like, that's James Charles palette right there. So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. Like I said, I do have more videos coming up, including the foundation review that I am filming actually like right now at this moment. So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you're having a fantastic day, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!